Hi, Dino Otranto here, and I cannot wait to have a chat with Tim Banfield on Finding the Front with Euros Hartleys.
Welcome to Euros Hartleys Finding the Front, where we get to know the people who front some of Western Australia's leading companies, providing you with real insights into the way they think and approach things, both in business and in life. So get the volume adjusted in your car or your headphones sorted and settle in for a great story. Here's your host, Tim Banfield.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening in to another cracking episode of Euros Hartleys Finding the Front. For those of you who aren't familiar with Euros Hartleys, we are a proudly Western Australian financial services company. We specialise in the provision of private wealth management, corporate finance, institutional sales and targeted research services. If you'd like to learn more about Euros Hartleys, please don't hesitate to contact us or visit our website at www.euroshartleys.com. Well, our special guest for this episode is none other than Dino Otranto, the CEO of Fortescue Metals Group, stock code FMG. And what a story it is. Dino has forged a career in the resources industry spanning some 20 years, working in senior roles for the likes of South32 and Vale, before joining Fortescue in 2021. As we all know, Fortescue is a huge Western Australian success story. Dino is leading the company through a period of rapid growth, including the implementation of large-scale decarbonisation technologies in accordance with a roadmap set out to achieve Fortescue's vision of green iron metal. This is a story told from the heart, with experience, passion, expertise, knowledge and enthusiasm. So without further ado, it gives me a huge pleasure to introduce to Euros Hartleys Finding the Front the CEO of Fortescue Metals Group and all-round great bloke, Mr. Dino Otranto. Hi Dino, and welcome to Euros Hartleys Finding the Front. It's really good to have you on the show. It really is. And I know you've moved things around to be with us today, and thank you very much for taking the time. It really is appreciated.
It's my pleasure, Banners. Thanks for having me today.
There's so much to go through, and really I'm quite excited about the opportunity to have a chat with you around your remarkable career, and then also what is going on with Fortescue and the advances that Fortescue is making. In the first instance, what I wanted to do was just explore a little bit about your background, which was really interesting because you were born in Germany.
That's correct. The family and I moved over when I was a young fella to the hills of Perth, and that's where I grew up and had an amazing childhood. Dad, Italian, mum's German, and me and my brother were born in Germany, and then my sister came along here in Australia.
What age did you arrive in Australia?
Yeah, we came over just before I started primary school, so pretty young, but had to learn English pretty quickly. Went to school not knowing much of the language, and when you're immersed in a different culture and as a young kid, you can pick up a different language pretty quickly. And I think now I really respect the fact that I can speak a couple languages in addition to English, which has helped over a few years.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Ja, ich kann auch Deutsch sprechen. Wir können jetzt in Deutsch sprechen.
Wunderbar.
Wunderbar. I didn't know that you spoke German, mate.
Oh, very, very, very briefly, mate, briefly. Your dad, what did he do when he came out?
Yeah, funny story. So my dad, he was a butcher back in Italy and also a cook. So when he came over to Australia, he found a job in the old Merlin Bistro, which was actually located in the old Fortescue Centre.
Coincidentally.
So when I joined Fortescue a few years ago, my desk was literally in the same place that I used to go and visit when I was a young fella visiting Dad at work. Yeah.
And he had a real passion for food?
Yeah, that's right. So that continued on when Mum and Dad bought a fish and chip shop. And that put myself and my sister through school. And, we earned some money there in the shop. But it was a big part of our life for a long time. They had that for nearly 40 years, and Mum and Dad retired not too long ago.
Was that in Lesmurdy, up in the hills where you grew up, the fish and chip shop?
No, it was actually in Riverton, near the old Shelley Bridge down there. So funny story, because Dad was a bit tight with his money, and it was called Brian's Fish Bar, and he never wanted to stump up, I think it was $500 to change the name or put a new sign up. So it was Tony at Brian's Fish Bar. He became a bit of a celebrity wearing the socks and Wally Masua shoes in the shop. So if you ever see Sushi Mango, there's a fish and chip shop scene. That was pretty much my upbringing.
That's good. That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about schooling. Did you enjoy your school, like the local primary and secondary schools? Did you find that you're academic, or did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, it was Lesmurdy Primary and Lesmurdy High. It was the closest school where Mum and Dad still live today. I was only a couple hundred metres away from home, so I'd get up and walk and ride to school. I had very fond memories of Lesmurdy High, actually. I still have many close friends. I've been away from Perth for a while and being back now for a few years. I've been able to reconnect.
Yeah.
Actually, I gave a speech at Lesmurdy High in the old gym a couple years ago as part of the graduation, and met the kids of my old mates up there, and it's kind of special. So I've bought a bit of land back up there.
Yeah.
Hopefully with my three boys, we spend a bit of time out in the bush there, and it's just fantastic being home. Like I said, Mum and Dad are still up there, so I'm up there all the time.
It's really interesting how that leaves a mark on you, and how you've now gone back to revisit, where you grew up. You were clearly pretty bright, but I just asked the question, did you know what you wanted to do when school finished? Like, did you have a career path in mind?
Look, probably not. My best mate's dad, he came and gave one of those career speeches at your school. And he was in the mining industry, and he drove a Land Cruiser. And I thought, that's it. I want to be in the mining industry because he has a Land Cruiser. And that was a pretty flash car. Yeah. Still is very flash. I'm a proud owner of a 70 Series Land Cruiser myself. And I thought, well, it was a really interesting story because he travelled all over the world and was able to apply what he learnt here in WA all over the world, and his son was my best mate, and he had a big flash house, and I thought, well, this is pretty good. So I just Googled, what was the career of the university education, which led into making the most coin in the first few years, and then that was chemical engineering at Curtin in those days, and so I applied, and I got in just. I think I had a conceded pass for English, but the rest of the subjects I did pretty well at. So I always kind of knew, I have a philosophy around the 80-20 rule. You don't sweat all the small stuff and just get on with it. Yeah. And I got in and I wouldn't say that I enjoyed the real technical aspects of it as much as I think more the social and learning and the application of generally processing and engineering and solving problems. And the degrees I did was a combination of science and engineering. So you had the creativity of the experiments coupled with then the discipline of getting it done. Yes. And I think that's somewhat led into who I am today. It's I can straddle between real out there thinking, but always grounded in the world of practicality of let's get stuff done. And I love that. I love rolling up my sleeves, getting dirty, and just building stuff. It's phenomenal, that feeling.
So you came out of Curtin along those lines with a Bachelor of Engineering and a Bachelor of Science. And that sort of set the standard for where you wanted to pursue your life. That was interesting because you ended up doing a year in the Netherlands to finish off the final part of your degree. And it's quite interesting that revolved around energy research, and it was with the Energy Research Centre of the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at the end of most degrees, you got to do some practical vacation type work. And I overheard a conversation in the hallway at Curtin about a partnership that they wanted to foster. And I had done some work at turning the Muja power stations green in the early days with biomass, which was a bit of an epic failure, to be honest.
But fascinating at the same time.
Yeah, it was actually. And we decided to use a bunch of refuse leaf litter, and it's all carbon, right? So let's make some energy out of it. And that started to spark my interest in this field. So this opportunity came up where they needed somebody to start this kind of inter-university, inter-research play. And I overheard it and I said, look, pick me. It's early 20s, amazing to go to Amsterdam for a little while. I was sent over there, and my field of study at this time was the mad cow epidemic. So they had a lot of basically biomass waste, and they decided to turn power out of that. So they minced them all up and put them in power stations, and my job was to determine how much stuff and gunk was left behind and classify that in scanning electron microscopy technology. And that's what I did for a while. It wasn't a year, but then I came back.
Holy cow!
Literally, holy cow! But it was just phenomenal, right? To open my eyes up to back to Europe where I grew up. It wasn't too far from where I was born, but also to see this world of research.
Yes,
and they developed solar cells there, and they had a nuclear plant there, wind, biomass. It was amazing, and sucked in this unbelievable capacity from all over the world. And that taught me, when you bring together diversity of thought and technical diversity and just house them all together, throw a few pizzas and a few Dr. Peppers in it and have a good time, you can come up with some of the most amazing technologies.
Yes.
And again, it's just something that stuck with me is this, wow, like if you have a will, right, you have a vision, you got some money, and you can do some things.
Yes.
And humans can create and solve some of the most phenomenal problems.
And did that give you a really good start in life on learning about what was achievable when you went to the Netherlands? Like, it sounds like it's a really pivotal year of your life in terms of getting you started into what you wanted to do.
Yeah, look, I probably didn't appreciate how pivotal it was.
Yeah.
And because one of the things I don't like in a purely R&D and academic field is sometimes you're not really creating stuff in the timeline, that suits me and other people that love that timeline. But I kind of got a little bit bored with the fact that you were just predominantly doing research and data and analytics on it, and maybe you came up with one thing in that time. So it really taught me that balance of, how do you take these amazing concepts, right, and then turn them into real practical applications that are economic or serve a purpose. And that's why I came home actually, and finish off my studies here. And I thought, well, back to listening to my mate's old man, get my hands dirty, and that started, my first job in industry down at Worsley Alumina as one of the field engineers down there. But I moved out of home and I was down there.
And and that's where you started as a graduate. That was quite a period of time, because you ended up with the business as it evolved for 9 years. It's quite a long time.
In fact, it was longer than that, because I did 2 stints. So I basically did every single job you can imagine in very, very heavy, complex mining, logistics, port, and mining business, a processing business down there. And sometimes I think that those 4 big refineries down the southwest, they don't get the credit that they're due, because the amount of brilliant people that those facilities produce, I think is not recognised, purely because the margins in alumina aren't as high as some of the gas or iron ore margins that I'm fortunate enough to be part of now. But some of the people that are down there, and they're heart of the earth type people, because they're all living in the country, they're home every night, they have a real passion and ownership of those facilities because they know in those small communities, we were the biggest employer in the Southwest.
Yes.
Right. And everybody understood the benefit of living in the Southwest, close to the beach, close to the surf. You had to protect that. So that real community feel really stuck out for me. And my first stint was 9 years. And then I came back for my sins and did a few more years actually down there after I went to Africa for a few years.
Well, there's a couple of pivotal points in that period of time. You met your wife, Lauren, during that period of time, who was coincidentally working for Fortescue, I understand.
Yeah, it's my story today. It's got a few interesting, I don't know, points of fate.
Well, it started with your dad's restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, and I met Lauren, and she's just absolutely amazing. She really does that cliche, completes you. She's phenomenal. But I met her, and I quite rudely asked her. I met her at Tiger Lil's. It was a classy establishment back then. Apparently, it's not so classy anymore. It's about to reopen, I think. But yeah, it was a bit cheeky, and I asked her that night. I said, "Will you marry me? And will you move to Africa with me?" But she said yes to one of them, and that was, "Yeah, I'll take a journey and come to Africa with you." And I thought, "What? You just met me." And but what I remember, she just spoke about this culture of Fortescue, and I actually thought she was, a little bit odd. That how can somebody speak so highly of an organisation and a culture?
Yes.
And she was with some of her workmates, and they all spoke the same way. And I thought this is quite interesting, and that kind of again just stayed with me. But yeah, we set off and did a few years pre-kids, and moved to Mozambique, which was just phenomenal. That experience to take a young couple who have largely grown up in Western safe jurisdictions, and at that point it was the poorest country on the world. Just finished 20 years of civil war. And BHP had an operation there and built an aluminium smelter, really out of nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And that business was the most efficient smelter on the planet, and it shouldn't have been because it had nothing going for it. Right. The social systems in Mozambique, the logistics, trying to get a part in was just near on impossible. The borders, the tax, flooding, you name it, it happened. But we had the absolute best time of our life there. And we both worked in the same site.
So you worked together for a while?
Yeah, we're never going to do that again, ever. I was in maintenance, so running 27 maintenance superintendents on a big pot line and carbon shop, and she was in health and safety. So yeah, it was interesting.
It just continues from there because you ended up being part of when South 32 was created, and it became an independent company after being demerged. That was for a couple of years. You were sort of general manager of the refinery, and then you went into vice president of operations. Can you just talk to us about the challenges of the spin-off, being in quite a senior role in that, and then ultimately being responsible for the lot in the end? Just tell us a little bit about that, Dino.
Yeah. Look, when you play it back, it is what an amazing honour and experience, really. I mean, it was pretty evident for a while there that you had two different gears of BHP Billiton. Okay, Billiton had merged with BHP, and what was starting to happen was a bit of a bifurcation of these large, mega, tier one, relatively simple operations. The complexity was with the size. And then you had this group of bit tougher assets, which had low margins, very complex, heavily processed environment, shorter mine lives, and geographically dispersed in Africa and Australia at that stage. And then, some of the concepts that started to eventuate. I said, look, if we really want to make this business, these different businesses profitable in this BHP one SAP, Marius Klopper's world at the time, really profitable.
Yes.
You may needed to apply a very different mindset, a bit more entrepreneurial, much less overhead, less bureaucratic, a bit more decentralized approach. And that led to, Graham Kerr, who I really, really hold highly in my regard, making a pitch to the board, and Andrew McKenzie and being part of that was And then the board said, yes, let's do this. And we all kind of looked at each other and go, oh, what? We felt like the dog that caught the bus. Like, are you serious? Like, we're doing this? And yeah, it was on. And we did all the banking and the economic analysis and how would we split and all this. And we had, the big BHP study teams and all of this stuff going on. And then we cut the umbilical cord. And I remember we had to say, well, this is after we came up with the name and all of this values and all of these things that you needed to do. And then we were by ourselves. And then we had to say, well, what's the share price going to be? And we kind of picked, on book value, it's about 10% of the assets, just pick a number. And then that was really where it was quite scary because the share price went from about $2.40, I think, to 89 cents. And pressure was on, right? I'm like, oh no, what have we done?
Yes.
Right. And was this the right move and all the rest of it? And that was just such an enriching experience where you really cut loose of the mothership and had to fend for yourself. And that team, I'll remember for my whole life. It was just a bunch of hardworking, phenomenal people that, we cried a lot. We laughed a lot, when the share price started coming back up. We had to go and do road shows, and I'd never done a road show before. So I'm talking to people like you and trying to tell them how great this business was, which was named Crapco in the press, right? And then all of a sudden people started jumping on the bandwagon. So actually, if you take out some of that overhead that you didn't really need anymore, this is a legitimate set of assets, right? And I credit Graham really for staying with it as long as he has and pivoting the vision of that organisation into more future-facing commodities, which is where they're at now, a very successful organisation.
Yes.
So I went with that business and stayed with them. Yeah.
So you were there probably for around 5 years, correct?
Yep.
Yeah,
I think so, yep.
And, Dino, from a management perspective, clearly you started to build your way up the ranks a little bit. What were the takeaways on building a company like South32, which clearly did experience some hardship with the share price to start with, but keeping people focused, keeping the team intact, keeping the culture the same that you wanted it to be? Because it sounds like it's quite shaping from what you're saying about Graham and the team that were there.
Yeah, what I liked about the assets of South32 is like Cannington or Gemco. Some of these businesses, when you go and spend some time there, they're all kind of similar, right? Gemco's on Groot Island, okay? So you're literally an island.
Yes. And
that's it. And so you get to be very familiar with all the people around you, okay? And Cannington is the same near Townsville. Worsley's got a bit of that same feel as well, where it's a real community aspect.
Yes.
And it wasn't actually that difficult for us to just build on that. And we made a decision from the start to have our own unique set of values and identity, and really position the message of that company as a real purpose.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's about community based and using the community to work through, get the ideas of the community and the base of the organisation, coupled with some hard facts. That business struggled there for a while. I mean, we weren't making any cash, and I learnt through that stage is this concept of real honesty, and I often get criticised maybe for being too honest and too open, but I just think of myself when I was in an operator role or at school. Sometimes you think just tell me what's actually how it is, because people know, right? When you've got a leader that's standing up there and they're not being authentic, everybody knows, right? So you might as well just have the hard chat.
Yep.
Right. And what I've always found is if you put that marker out there, there's a bit of an awkward silence. But then people very quickly, and this is what really Africa told me, when you don't have anything, this human creativity takes over. And you can put a real bad news statement, and we'll touch on, working for Andrew later, but he's the master of this, where he can see this and say, look, he's going to really catalyse change, and be quite provocative about it. And it's bloody uncomfortable. It really is.
Yes.
But humans, you just sleep on it. The next day you go, yeah, actually that could be possible.
I can get my head around it.
I can get my head around this. And sometimes if you put this unreasonable request out, heaven forbid, tariffs with Trump at the moment, this crazy ambitious, never going to happen, you may land somewhere in between. And I found that actually in the early days of South32, because it was existential.
Yes.
And the money that we created, that was stripped out of that business just to survive, was phenomenal. And nobody in 20, 30 years of life, and no disrespect to anything about big organizations, but under a BHP umbrella, it was never going to happen.
Yeah.
Because you had all these myths that were taken over. And that taught me a lot about, very purist, and kind of reminded me of a story I like to share with people is when you're the only employee for your mum and dad's shop, you learn very quickly the value of productivity. And if you're going to drag your feet, and your dad has to, your mum says, like, it's time to go, I'm going to hire someone better than you. And I'm like, wow, I'm your son. That teaches you a lot about productivity and waste, right? And you quickly learn, right? So, okay, I'm going to step back up. And that all for me starts with, with care and respect, quite honest feedback.
You clearly took that total package that you took out of, say, South 32 into a bigger business when you moved to Vale, right? And for the listener, Dino then moved to Vale in Canada. Now, again, this was a pretty pivotal part of your life. I've used pivotal a few times, but there's been a number of sliding door moments which have changed your views and outlooks or consolidated your views and outlooks as well. But working with Vale in Canada taught you another culture, another way of doing things, but you really were in the thick of it with Vale and, as Chief Operating Officer largely through that period of time. Can you just tell us a little bit about working for Vale? And I know will lead to a particular circumstance, but, just in initial stages, how did you find Vale and working in Canada?
Yeah, so I joined Vale, a Brazilian huge iron ore company, which bought, at the time, it was one of the largest mining companies, Inco.
Yes.
Nickel copper business, predominantly in Canada, Europe, Asia, and thought, let's just apply the Brazilian, iron ore mantra to a business that was more like the South 32 type of businesses that I was talking about. So I had a bit of a deja vu moment when I walked into that. And so my role was really to blend cultures. And I think Australians do that really well.
How old were you then, Dino, when you arrived in Vale?
Oh, geez, kind of late 30s or something like that. Yeah, old fella. No, I walked in after some experience with South 32 and kind of like-minded assets. And I always say that Australians are quite unique because we come up, through our last, very relatively short history with this just mix of different cultures and where this is mixing pot. So I was faced with a very staunch, conservative, very heavily unionised Canadian work culture with a very Mediterranean, liberal Brazilian culture, which, you respected your job at Vale for life, right? And this clash. You had Canadians running it and Brazilians running it, and it kind of never was this appreciation. So I think the reason I was sent over there is because I was a little bit of Switzerland, right? I could speak a bit of Portuguese from my time in Mozambique, and
yes,
could connect with the Canadians because I was an Aussie, and being an operator really I think helped bridge some of that gap. And it was phenomenal. I was in Sudbury, right in the middle of Canada, living in the forest, hunting, fishing, doing all the things that you could dream of in Canada, skiing.
Outdoor paradise. And
my youngest boy, Jack, was born over there. So I say he's my little Canadian kid. But it was an interesting business because structurally that business and still is has some real structural things going against it, and it's a 140-year-old business, right?
Yes.
It's huge, and a lot of cultures, generational cultures. The union movement was founded in Sudbury, right, and started there, and so change was really, really difficult, and fortunately or unfortunately, I was part of a 77-day strike, which took 5,000 people out of Sudbury, and they wanted unpaid leave for 77 days, and I was the front and center of that. So I was, challenged. My family was challenged. The press didn't take too kindly. Certainly the largely a socialist government didn't take too kindly that you'd have a Brazilian company take out 5,000 people in a very, very left union town, right?
So you really had to really understand how to deal with the unions face to face.
Oh yeah, the local union president, I'll name him, Nick Larochelle. He's a great guy. Actually, I spent more time with him over that few years than probably anyone in my own business. We'd catch up for coffee most weeks, and it just taught me that. It taught me a lot about political movements and how they can really interface with what I'd say grassroots activity. And we got caught up in a macro movement that both of us did that we didn't understand, and that was the biggest learning out of us. And it was funny because I'd go fishing in the lake one day, and then the next day the guy I was going fishing was at the picket line refusing to let me into sight. And it was just really weird dynamic, right? And they're like, "Oh, it's not you, Dino. This is for the cause." And then the next day they call me up and go fishing again. It was and I just couldn't get my head around it.
Yes.
It was just a really strange environment, and I was like, "Guys, can't you see this? This mine has to be profitable, right, for us all." Right, not you, me, not benefits or whatever it was. This had to be profitable for us for the long term. I want my kids to be here. We set up roots there, and that taught me like, wow, there's nothing that beats, I think, one team working together, right? And this whole management, us and them, and people wore different uniforms. We're in the same company. Like I've never experienced that in my life, and now I appreciate that was 140 years. And early days, there was some terrible things that happened underground, right? Terrible things, rock falls and fatalities you can count, every month. It was terrible. So there was a real active role for some resistance to that.
Yes.
But I kind of thought this day and age, if you can really maintain a good, credible, authentic relationship, people based on honesty and working together, you have a very successful mix.
So you did resolve the issue in the end with the unions and the workforce. How did it unfold?
Yeah, look, I mean, we ended up after 77 days exactly where we began. Right, and again, I walked away from that going, what was the point of all that? It was the same guy that I was picketing with, and I sat down later and I said, what was the point of that?
Yeah.
What did we do that for? We won. I said, well, technically no one won here. We didn't make 77 days worth of production. We lost a whole bunch of money. You didn't get paid for 77 days. What was the point of this? I just don't get it. I honestly don't get it. I can understand if the cause was about safety or rights or something like that. But you're talking about extremely high-paid people in great industries. Yeah, not too dissimilar to what's happening here in the Northwest at the moment. You're talking about the highest paid people on the planet, right? Unbelievable conditions that are all, a lot of them are all my mates, right? And we have the same purpose. We want to do the best thing by our family, the planet, have a bloody good time doing it. And why try and mess that up? That's the bit I just don't get it, honestly.
Yeah, sure. Just moving to another subject around your time there with Vale. You were part of the, incredibly unfortunate collapse of that tailings dam, which had a lot of fatalities attached to it. And you were on the ground at that point. Now, clearly this was a life-changing moment, and I bring it up knowing there's sensitivities around it, but from your perspective, and this is a very unique perspective, what were the takeaways that you took from that period of time, Dino? Because I know that is something that's going to stay with you.
Yeah, look, it's completely changed how my brain works.
Yeah.
I couldn't put it any other way. It was a tragedy, and it killed 271 people. 271 people. it was horrific what happened. And I think fortunately it was all caught on camera, live camera, and it was essentially streamed on TV live. And I was in Toronto, and I'll never ever forget this moment. And I was sitting next to Eduardo Bartolomeo, who became the CEO and has just left Vale. He was my boss. And we sat down in an all meeting, and one of our Brazilian colleagues was on the screen, and she just went like dead white, and started speaking, rabbiting on Portuguese. Said, "Turn this on," and we watched it unfold. I mean, you can Google it now, and I encourage people to do it. Just Google Brumadinho dam failure. It's a 2-minute live video of what happened, and the entire dam collapsed instantaneously in front of our eyes. And yeah, this is the tough bit. You know, there was a cafeteria right in front of it, and there's 400 people in it, and it just words can't describe it.
No,
Mate.
no.
It just cannot describe it, right? And then going back, and there are bodies in that just still haven't recovered, right? And it's just unbelievable. My peers who are accountable for it, they were there talking about, in these, remember, these are regional communities where the entire business benefits from these mines, similar to Collie or Bunbury or something like that. And so you had this real strange mindset where, wait a minute, this is what's been giving me sustainable communities and development. And at the same time, you've just wiped out my entire family.
Yeah.
And we had mothers and fathers and grandfathers and mothers and kids and that it was almost like a war scene. Yeah. And you had paramedics, a global emergency task force was mobilised, and to Eduardo's credit, he approached it in a very humble way, and said, "Look, this we just cannot. We're sorry. I mean, we can never ever forget this, and we will do whatever we can to make this right. And it will never be right." Right, but and that taught me so much. It taught me, about just the seriousness of consequence management. And I know for many professionals out there, risk and governance are very topical at the moment. It always, most people's eyes roll when you talk about it, because it's an add-on and it's never going to happen to me. What am I doing all this for? But when we look back, and I remember the commentary at the time was, well, this is an accident and once off thing. And I was sitting next to the 95-year-old guy that designed that dam. Unbelievable. And he said, "This is not an accident. This should never have happened." And then that stuck with me, right? Because you had this grief.
Yes. And
then you had the guy saying, "This shouldn't have happened. It was bulletproof." Okay, so we tested him out, and sure enough, it was bulletproof. And what happened, and most of this is under legal privilege, but really we just basically we thought we were in control, and that point has changed my entire life.
Yes,
where in financial services or in mining or in oil and gas, there's a large business that is essentially giving assurance, telling people they're in control when they're not, right?
Yep.
And that scared the absolute bejesus out of me, because I was part of that process, and I've been my whole life. And coming in with auditors and the big four banks and FM Global and all these insurance companies, and she'll be right, everything will be great. And this dam got that tick of approval as well.
Yeah.
Right. And then you saw it on video, and then, wait a minute, something's wrong here. We've missed this. And this is why, and I said this to Andrew when I joined into Fortescue, is, look, this has happened to me. Right? My brain is fused like this.
Yeah.
What I'm going to commit to you is we're going to simplify this, but it will never happen. Okay? And you are a pretty impressive character, and the regulators, they're all, big and powerful, but I'm probably going to be a stick in the mud here if something doesn't feel right and doesn't look like to me. Okay? I'm just giving you the heads up because my brain's changed.
Yep.
Okay? Because it was such a catastrophe. And the science will tell you your motor neurons don't actually change unless you've had a near-death experience or something like that. And that was it for me.
Yep.
It's completely changed the way I think. And that's led me to a path now of giving guarantee to loved ones, giving guarantee to shareholders, giving guarantee to boards that this isn't going to happen again. And the beauty of the last 10 years is that technology has come, the processing of data has come so far and so cheap that you can now do it on scale.
Yes.
In our business right now, I can show you an app that gives me 100% assurance, continual assurance that this stuff isn't going to happen.
Which has changed the landscape.
It's changed the landscape, right? When you think about what auditing was, it was limited assurance. You go in and I'll tell you, hey, we're going to go and audit this today, whether or not it's the dam failure or financial Sarbanes-Oxley audit or something like that. Everybody knows that it's on. I was on the receiving end of that. Guess what happens? Everything is right. Right? You don't want to be a red light in an audit report, okay? Because it goes to the board.
Yes.
I've been that person where you've had to explain to the board why you've got a red light here. And that drives this subculture of green lights. Everything is green, right? Audit firms are forced to go green. For me, it's not about that. It's just data and value data. Value red more than you value green.
Yes. The
beauty these days is you can apply large language models, AI, but even before that, you can apply a little sensor. Your car right now would have a reversing sensor. My car the other day, something jumped in front of the road. I drive a little mini Cooper. You saw it out in the driveway there. Bang! It stopped. I'm like, my God, what happened? Guess what it was? It was a rubbish bin that fallen onto the road. That could have gone straight through my windscreen, but my car stopped, which is continual assurance when you think about it. Right? It's a sensor. It's noticed something and it's prevented you from doing something. Right? In the old system, you would have hit that. Right, and then someone would have come 3 weeks later. I'm going to test all your controls here. Does your brake work? Does this work? Does this? It's all good, and you've convinced yourself that'll never happen. And that's what happens in our industry all the time. It still happens now, and that's why I get a bit fired up about this. Man, this is serious stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And you can use it. I say you can use it for good because the same data modeling and same data acquisition you use to find downside risk, you actually use for upside risk, opportunity assessment. It's the same data set, right? And if you can get your head over the fact it's not red or green, it's just data, and go after it, boy, that's where value gets created. And hopefully we get to talk a bit about that soon.
Yeah, no, we will. But, I just wanted to say thanks for sharing that. I could tell, and for those listening, that, through your body language, this was a bloody tough period of time in your life, and one you reflect on very seriously, and the learning that's come out of it is clear. And for you to then take this and then impart what you've learnt to be able to, in many ways, ensure that it doesn't happen again is a positive that's come out of a very, very negative and sad and incredibly sad situation.
Yeah, can I just jump in? I've had that a bit. This is not a positive situation. This is a tragedy.
Yeah,
should never have happened.
Yeah.
Okay. So I see it more as an obligation.
Yeah.
Not a positive. This is an obligation I have, and I've had people come to me and say, "Mate, you got to stop this." Until I explain the why and the story, then they get it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dino. So that was the period of time in Canada with Vale. COVID comes along, and pretty serious period of time in itself, and you were approached an opportunity came along with Fortescue. How did you find that opportunity, or how did that approach come?
Yeah, it was another, I guess, one of those sliding door pivotal moments. So Lauren and I had been largely away from Perth for about 20 years, and my mum and dad and family here, and her mum and dad at that point, now just mum, and WA as well. And you at 20-year mark, being an expat and being away from Perth, I mean, you start drifting.
Yeah.
Right. And you get, if people forget to invite you to birthdays, and that's right, you're part of the family. And then for me personally, I started to feel a little bit patriotic, and I don't know if it was coupled with age or my parents getting older. I'm the eldest of three. I just started to feel this longing to give back to Australia, and particularly WA. So I think we're blessed for many reasons. And
Yes.
I thought, look, we've been, Laura and I have been on a 20-year apprenticeship at that point, and we've got all the tools in the toolkit. Where can we go and apply those tools? And it was so strange, because I remember this vividly, and Laura and I were in bed, and we thought, let's do this, right? Let's start looking. And literally the next day I get this LinkedIn message. Did you want to have a chat with Twiggy? And I'm like, bloody oath I want. I mean, the guy's a celebrity, and I was wearing my my R.M. William boots. I got them when I was 17 from the DFO second shop. It cost me $160. I still got the hole in the back, which is a second. People know that what I'm talking about. And they're onto their fourth sole, and I was wearing them because I bought the rubber soles for Canada.
Yes.
And I was wearing them at the time. I was looking down and I thought, no, this can't be legit. So sure enough, I in true Fortescue way, I met the whole family. Not Andrew's family, but the Fortescue family, the board, and some key management people. And Elizabeth was amazing, and Mark Barnabar, two of my real role models. And got an opportunity to meet Andrew. I was so nervous. I was sitting in the basement in Canada, and he was on his way to Hazelmere, where he was looking at the new trucks that we had, and he was telling me the story about the trucks, and I don't know, I got a real good sense out of that, and it was a fleeting moment for him, but he left this impression on me, and he kind of said, "Yeah, let's do this," and I'm like, "What?" And that's it. I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So that was it, and he said, "I'll have the jet over there tomorrow to pick you up." I'm like, "No, wait a minute, we're in the middle of COVID, I still got a contract, all this usual stuff." And I said, "Got a mother-in-law with me, and I've got the house," and he goes, "What about 2 weeks?" And I'm like, I don't know, but it happened so quickly, right? And and I thought, wow, this is an organisation that I reckon I'm going to have a lot of bloody fun with, because, he got me back into Australia, right, during COVID in WA. Right, and
which was no mean feat, and
it was all done above board. I don't want to go there, legitimately, because we spent 2 weeks in Sydney, which was on the 24th floor in a 2-bedroom apartment with a mother-in-law, 3 kids, and no windows. It was pretty interesting experience, to say the least. But anyway, we got back and joined an organisation, and people often ask me, what's the culture like? And I say quite simply is, when you've grown up in roles that I've had, your key role often is to convince people to do stuff you want them to do, right? Largely that's it. Union, KPI meeting in the morning, crib room. I walked into a business where that's what I thought I had to do, and I found it quite hard, because you had 20,000 people galloping and running. Your job's to catch up.
Yeah.
Right? And then you think, no, I've got all these tools in my tool belt, and I've got to use my tools because I've got to be recognised for all those tools. And very quickly at Fortescue, the crowd, and Andrew speak up and said, hey, we got some different tools here. You can use your tool when you need to, but why don't you calm down a bit and just respect the tools that we've got here? They're pretty good. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. And then you start actually listening.
Yes.
And spending time breaking bread and just hearing people's stories, and you think, my gosh, there's some pretty phenomenal tools here. And it's not just tools about culture, which you hear about a lot. The technology deployment is unbelievable. We developed autonomy way ahead of anyone else. We've got the biggest autonomous fleet in the world. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The software that we have. Some of the work we're doing on green iron. I mean, the Iron Bridge flow sheet. It's unbelievable. And that's all catalysed by Andrew. He pushes that. And it's, if you have that mindset and that hunger and that resilience, you thrive. But it needs to start with this value we have of humility.
Yes.
You've got to be vulnerable to say, you know what, all of those things that made you important before, if you don't down tools for a bit and check yourself, it ain't going to work. And you do end up picking them up again, right? Because you can say, hey, wait a minute, this orchestra's playing pretty well. Okay, it was pretty. I mean, Elizabeth did an amazing job. We were making, great cash, great production records. I was nervous as hell to try. Oh no, I have to step into this, and I keep stepping it up.
Yes,
right. And if you try and step it up by ratcheting it with a hammer that you thought you had, ain't going to work. What you can do is to say, hey, wait a minute, you're more like a surgeon. There's a scalpel that I've got. You guys don't have. And when the team accepts you, say, check out this tool that I've got, guys. I'll pick that up over there. What do you reckon? They're like, yeah, we want that. Come and use it.
Yep.
And that's, for me, the secret of this enigma of Fortescue.
How did it feel then when you were appointed? Because you're only in the role, the Chief Operating Officer role, for a couple of years. How did it feel when you were appointed CEO? I mean, what an honour.
Oh, I still pinch myself every day. It's such a privilege. And then I kind of get over it pretty quickly, because there are just so many people that have such critical roles at Fortescue. We're not a hierarchical organisation, typical organisation. We are literally a family. It's like you've got an auntie that does this and an uncle that does that and a godfather does this, and the kids coming through, and wow, that kid's got some pretty good skills. That's how we roll.
Yeah.
And it's a bit odd for people to understand, right? And it's even difficult for me sometimes to understand, because it doesn't work like a normal organisation. But if you can master it, my gosh, the results are. Like yesterday, we did our quarterly result yesterday. We had $17.50, a TRIF of 1.1, which is in territory which no one believes. Okay, people think you're falsifying numbers. I can tell you it's not. Come and order it. Have a look. Okay, that's a reduction in our safety metric of nearly 30% off a base that was already unbelievable. And then production record.
Yeah.
And we had a cyclone, right? This just becomes normal.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. It's you focus on the enablers of that rather than the number, right? It's that intrinsic wiring of high performance throughout the business is what people focus on, and it's insatiable.
I love that term that is within the Fortescue DNA, stretch targets. It's a term that seems to be acknowledged and stretched for. Your reach should always exceed your grasp, so to speak.
Yeah, look, and I'll be completely vulnerable. That's the one that I struggle with a lot, right? Because it's like you've given your absolute all, okay, and then it's like, wow, let's go for this. What? I wasn't sandbagging anything to begin with, even if you don't believe me. Let's do it, right? And the first time you get that, and you think, oh, it's frustrating and it hurts, and you're challenged, and feedback is not very valued in business. In sports, feedback's amazing. It's a gift, right? But getting feedback in a professional sense, it can feel a little bit political.
Yes.
Right? But if you truly grasp it, what happens if you sleep on it? The next day you think, wait a minute, there could be a way. There might actually be a remote possibility that we could do this. And that's when the magic starts, because you start thinking some crazy stuff. What if we did it like this? And Andrew goes, do it. Do it yesterday. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And that is so inspiring yet painful at the same time. And it breeds this creativity in amongst the tension and all of that. And then you sit back 6 months later and think, well, actually 99 days later, did we actually build that truck in 99 days? 99 days. Think about that. And it's driving around now at Hazelmere. And people tell me it doesn't exist. They're in disbelief. I said, you can have a look at it. You can buy the thing. We launched it I was in Munich a couple of weeks ago with the whole Lieber family launching the production version of it. And I remember 2 minutes ago we were driving around Hazelmere near the Blood and Bone factory and with a bunch of amazing diehards that worked tirelessly day and night to make it happen.
And they loved it.
And they loved it.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty, it's awe-inspiring. I couldn't describe it any other way. And I absolutely love it.
It's so transparent to see that. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about it and the way that it unfolds. When I look at the business since you've come on board and as in your role of CEO, you really are leading the organisation and you're managing within the workforce is something like 20,000 staff, correct? Including contractors and that sort of thing. I mean, it's a big organisation to move forward and maintain that sense, that high-performing attitude, that stretch target mentality, and then also make sure everything continues to run as it should. When I look at the metals business some of this isn't new, but you really are looking at an iron ore operation in the Pilbara, comprising 3 Pilbara mining hubs, about 760 kilometres of rail, the Herb Elliott Port, the Judas Street Harbour towage infrastructure. Each year, Fortescue loads and ships more than 970 carriers from Herb Elliott Port. It makes Port Hedland status as the world's largest bulk export port by tonnage. And Fortescue is a major supplier of iron ore to the Chinese steel industry, shipping around 190 to 200 million tonnes a year, with more than 2 billion tonnes since 2008. You've achieved a record half-year iron ore shipments of 97 million for the first half of FY25, which was 3% higher than FY24, and then 46 million tonnes in the latest quarter, with record shipments achieved for the last 9 months. Now, I want to put that in perspective in a minute. Fortescue has delivered $42 billion in dividends to shareholders in the last 20 years. $42 billion. And you've got a pipeline of exploration targets, projects globally, Gabon in Africa, Latin America, and then you've also got Australia. But here's the final part. By 2030, Fortescue's aim is to have the Australian iron ore operations running on green energy and achieve real zero emissions.
Can I just say on record, a lot of those amazing stats, that was all done way before I joined any of this. So, and why I say that is this team that we've got, is the momentum, right? And we're led by a pretty passionate captain.
Yes.
And, I only wish I got on the bandwagon a lot earlier when my wife told me to buy it $2, but it's just a phenomenal economic story. It really is. It's phenomenal. Yeah. And there'll be many books written about this story at some point because it really captures, in theory, everything you needed to do to overcome monumental challenges, breaking into the steel mills and all these, heroic stories that were done by people who are still around, right? And our board is filled with some of the most amazing talent. And these are heroes to me that you emulate. They're such a diverse, rich, talented group of people that, drive the organisation, just as much as Andrew does. And then you've got this amazing group of people that, like I said, you struggle to keep up. So,
it puts context around what the organisation you're now leading, and you're going into a new phase.
Yeah.
You touched on it earlier, but the technology part is quite fascinating.
Yeah. Look, I mean, we are facing, as you can imagine, a lot of doubters, right? A lot of critics and a lot of people have done really, really well on the stock price. Why change now?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Why are you doing that? I like this. Just keep doing that. But that's not who we are, right? There is a unbelievable need to do what we're doing, particularly now, as I speak with the same passion as I did about my dam failure incident in this space. Is, you can be a climate denier or not, and I'm not going to sit here on a soapbox and try and convince you of the science or not. It's clear for me, and it's clear for the 20,000 people that work for us, and it's I was at a couple hours south of Exmouth last week camping with the boys at Windabandy, and went down and did a bit of snorkeling, and there's no colour left in the reef. It's all bleach. It's gone. Right? Last year there were still blues and greens. Now they're not. Right? Could hardly see a coral trout. I don't know if they've been speared out, but they're moving down south. I heard about wahoo and mackies and dollies just in abundance off Perth.
Yes,
and that's not normal, right? Things are changing, right, and they're changing so rapidly. And I've unfortunately seen a bunch of this stuff in north of Canada with ice caps melting and polar bears not being able to move. There's without a doubt humans have caused this. Okay. And right now, with what's going on geopolitically, people have an excuse not to want to do this. But that's, for me, a very, very short moment in time. And as companies are retracting, it's our obligation, it's life or death for us that we are going to do what we're going to do. So there's not even a question of if. People ask me, what are you going to do? I said, stop doing that. It's not even a question for us.
Yeah,
we're doing it. Okay, and we're going to mobilise who we need to mobilise to get it done. And why is not because of us. It's so we can show people who are finding it difficult and grabbing onto excuses to drop D&I targets or climate change targets or ESG targets left, right and centre now. There's probably more jumping off the bandwagon than they're standing up. Well, look at what Andrew's doing. He's standing up and be counted. He's saying, well, I'm going to put it on the line here. And he's got 20,000 people backing him.
Yeah.
That's a pretty impressive feat. And guess what? You look back, we're already doing some of this stuff. You've got solar installed, you've got high voltage network in the Pilbara installed, you've got trucks starting to roll out, you've got electrical management systems, you've got software, you've got autonomy, you got, the list just keeps going on and on and on. And interesting, in conservative mining companies like our industry, people need to see stuff. And as soon as they see it, they want it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. You can talk about this green truck all you want. You stick it in Munich a couple of weeks ago, and there's queues to just see it, that it's real. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. And that's where this catalyst goes. And again, and the jury will be out, right? And in a couple of years, judge us for our actions.
But on that, Dino, when you look at the commercial reality around it, so the path is set. The path is happening. It's unfolding as we speak. But the shareholder return or the value to shareholders over time is the concept of green iron will be the value. Once you're able to produce it and export it, it's really quite rare. And that's where Fortescue wants to get to. And now that's been caused by a couple of reasons. One, a drive to decarbonise. Two, commercial return. But also three, we've got competing issues going on around the world, such as other sources of iron ore that potentially are higher grade and also green steel being made out of the Middle East. Maybe you could just expand on these. Again, it's a really complex landscape, and I'll give it a crack to explain. So let me just start with a bit of a chemistry lesson on how you make steel. Okay, it's just basically iron. We make a lot of cheap iron ore, iron oxide, okay? And to make that steel, you got to rip off that oxygen molecule.
You can do that with carbon, C, or you can do that with hydrogen, H. Now, that technology has been around for a long, long time, more than 100 years, okay? So those routes are proven. It's the economics of making the carbon or the hydrogen. Now, coal has been the easy way to do it. So you've seen hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment, mainly in China and Japan before that, in mega blast furnaces, which basically cook coal with your iron ore. You rip off your oxygen. There you go. There's iron. You can put it into an oxygen furnace and create steel for construction, for anything you want. Well, that process has two quite nasty byproducts. One, carbon dioxide, which we're kind of familiar with. The other one is dust. Okay, it's an inhalable fine dust. Now, that was all right when all these steel mills were positioned hundreds of kilometres away from these mega cities in China. Well, everyone's seen the rise of China.
Yes.
Right? And those mills are now right in the middle of tier 2 cities that have got 20 million people in them. Okay? Last year alone, 2 million people died because of respiratory issues around PM5 and PM10, which is a very small dust molecule. Right? So there is a requirement not only for the planet but for health reasons and economics to think about how you stop doing that. And one solution is you go back to the other technology, which is hydrogen-based, which doesn't have that particular emission.
Right.
And for me, that's the opportunity now for Australia. So let me talk a bit about the processes of making hydrogen-based steel. One's called direct reduction, or DRI, which uses a high grade, predominantly from, in the future it will be Simandou in Africa, as well, the Pilbara Killer mine that we talk about, but also in Canada and a bunch of small deposits of high grade iron. And yes, you're right, there's a lot of investment going into the Middle East to produce that iron from the high grade with hydrogen, but made from gas. So you get rid of the dust, but you still got the CO2. Now, here's the big problem. The problem is only 5% of the world's geology, I'm talking fundamentals here, the stuff in the ground, enables you to take that pathway. Right? 95% of it comes from Australia and Brazil, which is low grade, relatively low grade, sinter fines, hematite coming out of the Pilbara. Now, there's an issue, right? Because if China's got its vision on a high-grade source with DRI and Saudi going to China, eventually they're going to run out of ore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm a big believer that the process will catch up to solve the problem where the majority of the assets are, and that's in Australia. Okay? We send 850 million tonnes of this stuff. I'm really worried that as the world moves more green in terms of the steel industry, it's going to start eroding Australia's position. And I want to maintain that.
Yes.
Now, this is the beauty. Over the last 5 years, the costs to produce that hydrogen through solar panels and electrolysis is dropping at an exponential rate of knots. Exponential. Okay, and this answers your economic question.
Yeah.
Right? So now we're talking about a future very, very soon where you can make that 95% or higher pig iron here in Australia using the sun and the wind to turn it into hydrogen, coupled with the iron ore at source at the mine, and export what the world actually wants, which is a green, dust-free 95% pig iron. The beauty of that product, it can still go into the steel mills in China. They get rid of the polluting piece, the blast furnace. They can still use all of the rolling mills and all the downstream products. So they don't lose their steel industry. They just get a better source of input. Now, that source of input's probably worth 5 times as much as the iron ore that we're selling. And we're finally bringing downstream processing back to Australia. And as a WA kid, that's always been the objective. Your phone, the old rules of thumb, about $4 of it goes back to the people mining the commodities out of the ground at a $1,000 phone. How do we take a bit more of that? That's the economics. And we're on the absolute cusp. And Fortescue this year is going to have the first 1,500 tonnes of this stuff coming out of the Pilbara. It's a complete game changer.
Just coming back to the economics part, 5 times more. The value of it is 5 times more.
Yeah, you're competing with scrap steel at $400-500 a tonne. At the moment, what's the price today? About $100 a tonne. Yeah. Okay. Now, to get that 5-time multiple, you need to invest downstream, right? You got to build solar farms. You got to build furnaces. It's hard work. Don't get me wrong. It's hard work, and this is my advocation to the federal government, state government, into China, and why I'm there that often, is this is an Australia-China green iron opportunity. And I applaud the federal government for announcing its direction in green iron. And Roger and the Premier here and the Prime Minister are all dead keen on this. They get this, right? And it's interesting because we have a real example on our doorstep of an industry that went down the same way, and Australia, Canada missed the boat, and that was nickel.
Yes.
Right? And interesting, because my past life, I oversaw the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, right, with Vale, and it was taken away and given to the Chinese to develop Morowali Park. And in that move, the deployment of lower cost capital into Indonesia, they've developed that island, the communities, but have disrupted every single other person on the planet in nickel.
Yes.
And nickel is where the mining industry in WA started, in Kambalda. That's why, for me, it's personal.
You want to protect the iron ore industry from not going down the nickel path.
Exactly. And it's bigger. It'll take longer. However, just look at what's happened, okay? And the Chinese are moving. They're not mucking around. They don't want to kill 2 million people a year, remember? There's a selfish interest for them. So they'll go to the Middle East. They'll go to Africa. They'll do whatever they can. I'll do the same thing. Why doesn't Australia step up and go, you know what? This is for us, for the taking. We have the best solar and wind intensity on the planet, right on top of our ore body, in the middle of the desert. We should be building the world's biggest solar farm right now.
Well, just with the cost in mind, though, I read that you're using something like 1 billion litres of diesel a year. The cost of that 1 billion litres amortised over time into the infrastructure you're putting into, what's the payback? Well, just the 1 billion litres of diesel alone,
if you look at yesterday, we announced $17.50 C1 costs, right? That's pretty much the yardstick of iron ore industry. We all want to be the cheapest. If you look at the price of about 1 billion litres equivalent of diesel, okay, about those numbers, it's between $3 or $4 a tonne. Yeah. Right? You imagine 17 minus 4, $13 a tonne. That's not bad, right? Yes, there's capital to get there.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we're working on right now. And we will deploy that capital and get a return from the offset in the fuel that we're using.
Got it. So therefore, this is the pathway, this is the solution to the challenges that the industry faces more generally, but also Fortescue. And then how do you get there? Well, then that's where, it's quite interesting when you see what Fortescue has done to kick into action. So you mentioned the $2.8 billion agreement with Liebherr deal. So you've got something like 200 plus mining haul trucks, which will ultimately over time become electric.
The number's more like north of 300. And total about 700 bits of gear.
Okay. And so, they're ultimately going to become electric over time using the technology that's coming out of Fortescue Zero, which is part of the Williams F1 acquisition that you've done out of the UK. So some of this technology is moving into the Liebherr agreement, and then the trucks are going to be electric. So that's going to save you a lot of diesel. your drill rigs. There's $350 million deal with Iperoc. And that's going to save another 35 million litres of diesel, that's all. So I can see the pathway and it's unfolding. The ships, the Green Pioneer. I mean, what an amazing ship. But that's going to roll out, ammonia-driven ship. So I flipped it right back. It's technology that is enabling Fortescue to deliver the pathway to get to that green iron, to then take advantage of the multiple that they can get on that, which will offset a lot of the capital expenditure over time that it's going to take to get there. I want to just come back and ask, with all this in hand, how is it going working with Andrew Forrest on this? I've watched, he recently did the leaders' breakfast for the West Australian. It was fantastic. He's done some great speeches. He's an inspiring speaker. He wears his heart on his sleeve. Tell us a little bit about working with him to achieve these goals. You did touch on it a bit earlier, but just, I can tell the amount of the balance sheet that's been thrown at this and the ambition and where it wants to go after such a successful business up until this point is quite amazing.
Yeah, look, and why don't you start there? I mean, think about that, right? The wealth creation for shareholders that he's been able to create to then take this on.
Yes.
It's just the strength, the resilience that takes is one of his unbelievable traits, and you get attracted to it like bees to honey, right? You just swarm to it. You think, wow, this guy is ready to take the establishment on, and there is an element that for most people at Fortescue and maybe some people in the industry, that's intoxicating, and you want some of that. You want to be part of it. You want the camaraderie. You want to feel that energy. And I can tell you, it's unbelievable. But I think there's another side to Andrew that gets missed in the intensity. And I mean, he, from when I met him, he was traveling, and I thought, wow, he must just be on a week long work trip or something. Then he would come home. He hasn't stopped, right, for nearly 4 years. He's unbelievable, the guy, and his intensity and his work ethic. I mean, I think they're all well told, but I think the bit that you don't hear about him is like in a family, he's quite protective of his pack.
Yes,
right, and there's a generosity there that I've never experienced in a professional life. And I'll share you a story. I had a few health issues last year, and being the typical man, you try and cover it up, and he found out. He's got a pretty good network out there, and he found out, and he didn't even say anything. He just sent his doctor my way, and the ability for him to help on a scale which I just didn't even think was on offer.
Yes.
Was just, those are the things that he'll never get credit for. He's so generous. Nobody ever paints him in that light. I've never seen one media article that talks about that side of him, right? So he's this real interesting dynamic of this hardcore driven with this soft side. And that I think is the most appealing thing about Andrew to me, is just his pure generosity. And he's doing this now for the right cause.
Yes.
Everything that he takes on, they're hard fights. He doesn't need to do it. He could be sitting on a beach somewhere, right? Yeah. But he doesn't.
I agree with you. I mean, he's got options. He doesn't need to do it. But it's clearly something he's very passionate about, and you can tell that's really, talking to you as well, the passion is just running really hard. The technology will continue to grow, and the beauty of Fortescue as well is that you've got access to it, which I think's it's almost the key point. Am I missing something, Dino? But I think that is it. You know, you can't just grow these trucks and drill rigs and ships out of thin air. You know, you've got to have contacts and you've got to know where to look.
Yeah, you're right, and it's actually interesting. You know, I found it a bit dumbfounding that the mining industry with its margins and the size and the scale is actually quite technologically hindered, right? I was when I heard the story about autonomy in mining trucks, and then some of my mother's sides in farming and in Europe, and I remember as a kid they were talking about running harvesters with iPads.
Yes,
and so that's autonomy, right? With an iPad, back 25 years ago, and I said, why are they doing that? And he was all about productivity and margins. Right? Farmers make no money, right? And they do it with an oily rag and all these stories. You'd know it more than I do from querying, right? The technology deployment out of necessity is where creativity comes from. And when you don't have that burning platform of necessity, you don't deploy it. And then in mining, have been criticised for wasting capital, making some pretty dumb acquisitions as an industry over the last generation. I think we've turned the corner on that. But the criticism for deploying capital into your operations versus returning it to the shareholder is really what's driven a change.
Yes.
But Andrew doesn't have that mentality. So this is where frugality comes from. Frugality has not just been about tight and taking cost out. It's about driving ingenuity, driving creativity, driving solutions that you need to go to farming or pharmaceuticals or biotech. In the mining industry, we're pretty slow, right? And that's where Andrew's taken this, and flipped it on its head.
Yep.
If you make it about existentialism, and we have a saying of burning the boats, right? If you want to learn how to swim, jump in the ocean and burn your boat. You learn pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
There's a need.
Yeah.
Right? And you get very creative real quickly. And that's what we have, right? And that's where you get this, this blossoming of technology. The AI, large language model applications we've got in our train system, for instance. Our train system was designed for 165 million tonnes. We're running 192 million tonnes now. No deployment of capital. That's not possible, right? Well, it is. And if you're a farmer, and that was, say, 192 tonnes, 30 tonnes more grain, and that was the difference between putting food on your table and not.
You'd find a way.
Yeah. It's just in your DNA. In our business, not so much. There's a lot more opportunity.
A big part of the Fortescue business is culture and First Nations people. You offer a program called Billion Opportunities, for example. Can you just give us a bit more of an insight into this part of the business?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And you mentioned one of our anchor stone programs, the Billion Opportunities program. We've clocked over $6.5 billion in commercial partnerships with First Nations businesses. And maybe what I wanted to share is that it's just so much more than that. And I think as a WA kid growing up here, going through the school system, you really aren't that exposed to a lot of our culture and heritage through the formal systems. So joining Fortescue and seeing firsthand how important it is on a number of different aspects. And maybe I'll tell the story of where we are now and work back on really my eyes opening. And again, the message is there's so much more we as a society here in WA in particular need to do, because the future is going to be so much more in partnership and collaboration with First Nations stakeholders, our communities, really everybody around the world, as we seize an opportunity, certainly as the next chapter of commodities grows. So a Billion Opportunities is one of the business development lenses we see our First Nations relationships. The other one is our VTech program, which is well told, where we offer guaranteed employment for entry-level roles to all First Nations people joining our business. We've got a LEAP program, which is a leadership-tailored program. And of late, we've added another arrow to the bow, so to speak, is our GIFT program, which allows our current First Nations employees a pathway into university. And we have a great collaboration with Curtin University, and we kicked off our very first partnership this year. But I guess for me personally, my eyes opened up. Actually, as I left Australia the first time, was going into Mozambique, and it was a really interesting, diverse mix of local, for the better word, it would be local tribes that have come together from all different parts of southern Africa. 400-year Portuguese colonial existence, so you've got that dynamic. You've got the Afrikaner influence over there, which is, again, in South Africa, well told. And then we came along and tried to build a business there, and it certainly taught me a lot about respecting very different cultures to come together to solve problems. But for me, it was most valuable, I think, my time in Canada, where the area we were was multiple nations had to work together to make these mines work. And I remember up in northeastern Canada and Labrador, there was two groups, Innu and Inuit, and at the time we kicked off the Voisey Bay mine development, which I think in reflection is the most progressive partnership model, where the two First Nations groups really advocated and supported for the development of that mine, took commercial partnerships, local employment, and it really, really opened my eyes to how much more we needed to do. So when I came back, and one of the areas which I didn't really appreciate about Fortescue was its rich inception was crafted on a commitment our chairman made to say, in partnership, we will develop the social and economic value of everyone that we work with, and our current relationships, and I would think the success of our business is anchored in that very early commitment, and it's just grown from there. And maybe lastly, I would recount from a couple months ago, I was at the celebration of the $6 billion mark in our Billion Opportunities program, and saw firsthand these businesses in WA that have grown, and actually have grown far outside Fortescue now. Most of the Aboriginal businesses that are giving support in the Pilbara and around WA had its roots at Fortescue. So for me, it was a bit of a proud moment to see these businesses thrive and be recognised at that evening.
You alluded to earlier you went camping up south of Exmouth. You clearly love the outdoors, spending time with the family. Tell us, what do you love about the outdoors?
I'm actually really, really quite simple meat and potatoes person. Cutting wood with the chainsaw, I really love doing. Really, really quite basic stuff. And it's funny because I had an opportunity to live in Toronto, beautiful city, and I said to Eduardo, I'm moving to Sudbury. And he goes, what the hell do you want to move out there for? Nobody goes to Sudbury. I said, well, I'm going to Sudbury, right? And I put myself right in the middle of the operations. Right, and I said, listen, if I'm going to be this role, I'm not going to sit in literally a gold tower in Toronto and Bay Street. I'm sitting out there,
yeah,
right? And I could see the stack from my window, and I could see the lake and my boat on the other window. So for me, that was just paradise. And so being back in Perth, to be honest, that's why I've just moved further east. I'm in Bassendean at the moment and enjoying a little bit more space and some trees and some birds. And I said this to Andrew the other day when I jumped out at my pop-top rooftop tent. It's not a fancy little camper with my 4-year-old. And I said, Andrew, there's something about being in nature which is just clarity.
Yeah.
And we live in a pretty crazy world. You just sometimes need that clarity and that simpleness to just make things right. And it was funny because I had my Starlink there with my little tinny, I was out past the reef and we're onto this big wahoo and it was fantastic. And then Andrew calls and I'm taking the call and I'm trying to, act all proper and you could hear he goes, "Where are you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still out here." And he just said, "Just enjoy it."
Yeah.
Right. And for all the chaos and drive, that's pretty powerful words, right?
Yeah, sure is. Look, I'll have to wrap it up. I'd love to keep talking about this. As I said earlier, it's just so interesting. But I do want to just say you can't help but get excited around what you're looking to achieve and what you have achieved. And you've been very generous with the way you've spoken about it and your background and understanding where you've come from and what's shaped you and to see where you've gone to now where you are and what the future holds. And the enthusiasm that you've got for it is it's so infectious. It's there. I can see it. So look, congratulations on what you've got to so far. And on behalf of all of us at Euroz Hartleys, thanks a lot for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and join us.
I appreciate your time, actually, for listening to the Fortescue story. It's like I said, it's just a great place to be, challenging and rewarding, and all of the rest of it. It's just a really good place.
Good on you, Dino. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks for listening to Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front. This podcast is for general information purposes only. Please check out eurozhartleys.com for more information. Euroz Hartleys holds Australian Financial Services Licence 230052.